Welcome to Mornings with the Mayor. As always, we have a very, very good show today, a very surprising show, one that you're going to want to listen to because this is where we get our information from our weather year-round. We have a meteorologist with us,
right?
Rob Guarino.
Yep.
Rob did work at Fox.
Yep, for 10 years.
For 10 years, and is now in Arizona.
Mm-hmm. And
you work with Jim Ryan, who's our Director of Public Works here. And Jim relies on you. So let me say, this is my first time meeting you, but I've been hearing every time there's a storm coming, well, Rob says this or Rob says that. And we've been doing a heck of a job with this, really.
Thank you.
Sincerely. It's, we rely on, this is my first time meeting you, but Jim believes so much, and he said, Rob said. So, okay, if Rob says that, we're going to be okay, right? Was he ever wrong?
I don't think so. Since it's been 2 years now, and he's pretty well nailed it on every storm that we've had.
Well, anyway, Rob, one of the things we were talking about, and something that you work with us here, and you pinpoint actually Bensalem.
Mm-hmm.
You actually pinpoint what you believe is going to happen with the weather out here in the Northeast, and you pinpoint it to Bensalem, and obviously you work with Jim. Tell us about that.
Well, I think one of the neat things is having grown up in this area pretty much for 20, 30 years now, you know how Lower Bucks interacts with the ocean, the mountains, this whole region. So having known that, this really is an area I can hone in on and know how this township works with not only the rivers, but the reaction to the storm systems like yesterday's, the nor'easter that came up. So it makes it fun for me because I don't have to worry about the whole country or even the whole Delaware Valley. I can just zone in right on Bensalem and kind of really get down to the nitty-gritty. With Jim on numbers, we talked about it, this storm, and said, you better watch for flooding and you better watch for some wind and give them an advance notice. But just really having the experience of being here so long really pays off in my forecasting. You can go, when I talk to Jim, I say, Jim, I have over 20 years experience here, and I know your area. So
why don't you tell us a little bit about that experience? I think it would, before we even get more into it, tell us a little bit how you got started.
Really started as a kid at 8, and I was a big fan of Jim O'Brien's and Herb Clark, who were big legends here, as most of you know if you've been around for a little while, and told my parents I'm going to be a weather guy on TV, and long story short, went to University of Delaware for my undergrad locally, and then got a break a couple stations in to come to Philadelphia, and was here for 10 years at Fox, and pretty much the rest is history from there. And what really, I think, got Jim into it was our track record on Fox was so good. I mean, it was just, we had such a great run winter after winter, nailing storms 4 or 5 days out and sticking with it and not going back and forth. And then the blogs we wrote on Fox, and then the website now, Live Weather Blogs, which has had 2 million people come in from the Delaware Valley last year. That's how big it is.
Wow.
Yeah, 2 million people last year. So a lot of people in Bensalem and Lower Bucks know of this site. And that's how Jim and I kept talking and staying in touch. Even though I left Philadelphia, which is now maybe 4.5 years ago, this site is bigger than ever.
Isn't that incredible? But what boggles my mind, and I'm a retired farmer, so the weather was everything.
It's everything, yeah.
Every day. Of course, we didn't have the forecast like today, 25 years ago. But what boggles my mind is that you just said 2 million people that blogging on the weather.
Philadelphia, believe it or not, is the biggest blogging city in the country per capita.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, I for some reason in this Philadelphia area, people like to talk.
I didn't know that either.
Yeah, you look it up. This was about 5 years ago that came out, and I was writing blogs for Fox before they were called blogs. The old way was you wrote a article like people do now, or a discussion, and everybody would email you. I would get 30,000 emails and have to respond back because there was no give and take. A blog now is you write an article, and then everybody writes comments below. And if that guy says, "Hey Rob, are we going to get 6 inches of snow in Bucks County?" I can answer that, and then I've answered thousands of people's answer without everyone having to email me.
Yeah.
So the word blog came about was the interaction with people. And that's what really blogs are, where they used to be just an article, and then everyone would have to email you. And I remember it took me almost 6 months to get back to people.
All right, switch over, Jim, and ask you, as you know, especially wintertime, and I'll ask you, and I'll say, we'll say, what's the weather going? He said, well, he says, I got to talk to Rob. He says, once I hear from Rob, we'll get a good idea what's happening. And one of the things to you, Rob, is that one thing that I done coming in retired out of business. I always run on service, service, service. We don't sell products here.
Right.
We give a service. So the service is very important, and Jim knows that. So why don't you talk a little bit about that?
Well, the winter is the, well, you know, it's the toughest, toughest time for us.
I know that, but remember last year without the winter? Remember all the storms we had,
yes.
the wind, and we
Irene?
We had a tremendous amount of damage here, wind damage last year.
I mean, it did. After winter, just when we thought we were going to get above water, then we got hit with well, they're calling straight line winds. I'm still calling it a tornado because it took a swath through Bensalem.
Well, I showed you one of my properties of woods.
Right.
Went straight through.
Just hundreds of thousands of dollars.
Just took every tree right out of the ground. I'm talking about trees this big, 2 feet in diameter. Took every, in a line.
In a line. Right.
100 foot wide.
And I think with Jim, it's a good point because when Jim and I started out, this has been a couple years now, we've worked together, it was just a winter operation.
Right.
And I think with Irene and these winds, he said, hey, look, I need you year round.
Yeah.
I need to be able to call you on a whim, or you send me a text and go, hey, heads up, in 2 hours, there's going to be a storm. You get your guys in place. Whether it's
absolutely.
branches, whether it's warning people.
And it happened.
And this is what we're working on.
It happened yesterday.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it was Tuesday or Wednesday when Rob first said, Jim, you got some nasty weather coming in over the weekend. And then on Friday, he said, expect 2 to 3 inches of rain. Well, yesterday, we had people out doing the storm work, and I got a call last night, 3 foot of water on Station Avenue again, with a car stuck in the middle. So we did. Our rain gauge showed over 2 inches.
There's a lot of pressure on Jim, obviously, because and I expect it, as do our residents. We expect to get the job done. So, he does. He does a fabulous job. Probably working with you and getting the right information is a big help. But they're out there. They're prepared, and that's the most. To me, that's one of the most important.
That's
things.
the biggest thing that we talked about when we had met a couple of times prior to this. We'll meet for lunch and stuff when I'm back here. And one of the things is if I can give him a heads up, especially going into a holiday or a weekend. People go out of town. They've got family coming in. They've got other commitments. You put guys on guard. Because they're not watching the weather. A lot of that's not their job. My job is to do that, and same with Jim. So when we tell him, talk to your guys, let them know that here's the window, whether it's thunderstorms, flooding, Irenes, October snowstorms, we had the fluke years we're having, he gets a head start 3 or 4 days out and says to his guys, hey, our weather guy, Rob, said, let's just keep in the back of your mind, so if something does happen, like even the raining last night or the flooding, nobody's caught off guard. You'll always be able to scramble a crew for whatever you need.
Very, very, very important, the preparation of it.
And with the budget the way it is, too, Your Honor, we don't want to bring our people in, 6, 8 hours before a storm just to sit there, just so we're here. If Rob says, Jim, this storm's going to hit at 10 o'clock, I can rely on Rob's forecast and tell our guys, all right, let's come in at 9 o'clock. That way, storm starts at 10, we're ready. And I don't have 20 people sitting, getting paid, just waiting for the snow to start.
Well, the technology today for you to be able to do that, it's incredible.
Yeah.
Because I mean, like I said, look, my whole life was on the farms and produce, and we raised all produce, and every day it was relied on us to get a crop out before a storm comes. And in those days, we didn't, we'd say they missed it again, or So, but today it's much more pinpointed, I think, anyway.
It is. I think today's society, people want it right all the time, and it still is not there. I mean, if it was right 100% of the time, I wouldn't have a job. It'd be, it's still an inexact science, we call it in the weather world. But one of the neat things is we look at computer models. Sometimes you overanalyze. And a lot of young forecasters I talk to coming out of college, a lot of guys I go to college and talk to them. So you got to look still back old school, as we call it. You got to look at the highs and lows. You got to look at how things are setting up. Don't go every 6 hours, because how it works is every 6 hours we get a new computer run. And here's all these computer models that take different variables for Bucks County and Philadelphia in the area, and all those models will give you maybe a different scenario. In another 6 hours, they may change again. So you can't go up and down and say to Jim, hey Jim, oh, it looks like 12 inches now, and then 6 inches. Oh, it's gone now. He can't follow any kind of order. So what we try to do is stay even.
What do you say? It's always a trend?
Trend is your friend.
Trend is your friend.
If it's trending up over and over and over, you follow that. It's a mistake by a lot of young forecasters. They want to take each run and use that as the word. I grew up you know, aging myself here, grew up where watching Jim O'Brien and them guys, you know, you looked at just very simplistic weather. And there's still a pure side to that you look at that first, then you look at the models. That's why they call them computer guidance. They don't, you know, for a forecaster. It's not what's written in stone. They're called computer guidance models because they guide a forecaster. Ultimately, the forecaster has to still make the forecast. And that's where the human side of things comes in. The models don't know that we have warm ocean water. They don't know that we have no snow on the ground. You know, when we have a big snow and then there's another storm, that makes everything colder. The models don't know that. They don't have that put in there. So that's the human side of forecasting in the winter. That makes
Are you telling me when you're on TV for 4 minutes a day or 5 minutes
3?
or 10 minutes,
Yeah.
3, that you work harder than that? That's not all you do?
No. We work a little bit, yeah. Well, in Arizona, it's, you know, 90% of the time you're right because it's sunny there.
Sunny, right.
Yeah. You're 90% when you walk in
But
the
you
door.
know, the temperatures every day are different, my goodness.
Yeah,
Sunday,
but it's a much easier than here. This growing up here and working 10 years in Philadelphia at Fox, there's been a lot of challenges. And I think the toughest part for the residents of Bensalem Township is a lot of people now have 2 people that work. You have kids that go to school.
Right.
When I can tell you 5 days out there might be a storm on Friday, you can reschedule meetings for work. You know, maybe it doesn't happen every time, but if you know that day's there, you can sort of plan around and say, I may have to be home with my kids. So here it is on Tuesday and they're saying it. And sometimes people in the Philadelphia area, they get upset when it doesn't happen. But I said, wouldn't you rather be prepared and say it could happen on this day, and if you can make plans to change around it, and it helps you make those plans, and you're not caught off guard where all of a sudden your children are home and you both have to work, what are you going to do? You're going to take a sick day, or is there an important meeting you have? You know, these are
you
things
guys
that
are
you
very
do.
popular. Everybody
Yeah.
gets mad
Yeah.
at you.
Yeah.
Have a bad day.
But they, you know, the accuracy is better than ever. You said this,
Oh, yeah.
Mayor, a few minutes ago.
No question about it.
I think society as a whole has become in tune with everything in life, that everything should be 100% right.
Yeah.
You know.
The weather today, in every aspect. I mean, if you're on 95 and it's raining, you got to know how bad the rain's going.
Right.
People want to know. It's every day. You know, the pollen count. I mean, just so many things. The weather's everything. I mean, we
It affects
depend on
everybody,
it.
and
Sure.
people rely on it more than ever because I told you, I think there's more traveling going on, there's more planning going on down the beaches. You know, in the 40s and 50s, you had your little world. You know, the travel networks
By
today,
the way, it
whether
was
it's...
not a bad world in the 50s.
No,
I
no,
love
it wasn't. It was a simplistic
It
world.
was
Actually,
neat.
I think
It was
about that
really
being
neat.
better. But
We
you
had
see
more fun in the
everybody's-
50s than
Yeah.
you could ever have today.
Yeah, and everybody's got the phones and the smartphones, and everybody wants to know right away if I'm going down the beach, make that quick decision. Where before you got up, you know, you looked at the paper or you watched
Yeah.
a couple of stations that were around, and you saw them, a couple of newscasts, and that was it.
And have it today. Wait, 7 and 10 day forecasts. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, there's 25 now and 14, and they're, you
Wow.
know, it's all trending.
you know,
And I'm asking him in September what it's going to be like in February. So.
Yeah.
oh,
We can
you
talk
wanna-
about that.
You want to
Yeah.
tell us a little bit
Yeah,
about what
I mean,
it looked like for?
I went back and I looked at everything for Bucks County and Bensalem Township, and I went back to all the winters. And they keep records really of any kind of reliability since about 1870. And said the odds of having a winter like last year, which was, I think, what, we get 4 inches here, 3,
Total
4,
4 inches.
4 even at the Philly airport. Up here it was a little bit less in some spots, is 1.9%. That means we've only had one winter we only had one time where back-to-back winters were less than 5 inches. And I went and looked at all the numbers, and then I took the top 10 worst winters and the top 10 lowest. And then you do, it's all a numbers game. It really is. It's like, you know, sometimes it's like playing the lottery. I mean, and it looks like, looking at the weather pattern, we're going from a La Nina to an El Nino, which can be a very big winter, but it can be also a very dry winter. It looks like we're dead on next year. So we'll say it now, 19.3 here.
19.3.
9.3, which is just about right down the middle of the road from here.
Average, right?
Would that be
Yeah,
okay?
exactly.
I don't want that much, but I'd settle for that.
Yeah, I'll settle for that.
30 inches or, yeah.
We rolling tape in February, watching 56 inches later.
We will,
got no
too.
salt.
We will. You know, I just want to, you talked about Arizona. I want to go back because I've been out there a few times. Very dry,
Mm-hmm.
but yet, when they get rains, they have bridges with these
Washes.
creeks. But,
They're called washes.
They're
yeah.
totally dry, and you can go out there and you get these torrential rains, and you got water rushing under.
Yep.
So that boggled my mind. I couldn't believe it. I mean,
Well, it's similar to here with the drought we were in. but even worse, the ground is concrete there. It's basically a desert. It does not absorb the water, and these washes become, like you said, rivers in the monsoon season. Monsoon season in Arizona is basically in and around July 4th to around Labor Day. It's 2 months where they get almost 70% of the rain year round, which is only about 10, 11 inches. 1 inch of rain here in the summer, piece of cake. It's a shower for you guys. You know what I mean? Bensalem gets an inch of rain. You know, we got a nice afternoon shower. It's kind of expected. 1 inch of rain there is like 7 inches of rain here.
Oh, wow.
That's almost, it will flood everything. And last year we had a storm in September at the end of the monsoon. It went a week actually after when it normally would end. And it was 2.7 inches at the airport in 3 hours. And there was water 6, 7, 8 feet everywhere. Police stations, township like this that was south Tucson was under 7 feet of water. In the garages, everything.
Wow.
It's
One
unbelievable.
storm.
Water.
When you see how dry it is, and then all of a sudden they get this thunderstorm, like you said, an inch is 7.
Yeah.
It's incredible. I watched this water.
The lightning's phenomenal too.
I've been out there in one big storm, and I now I know why they have bridges going over these gullies or whatever. What do you call them?
Washes. They're called washes. In New Mexico and places they're called arroyos. Those are the cement ones, like you see in LA in the movies. The cement rivers are called arroyos. But out there, that's everything. I mean, their 2 months is equivalent to our winter. See how critical winter is here when we get a snowstorm of a foot? That is their equivalent of monsoon. So in their summer, that's really our winter, if you kind of think of it that way. That's the critical period where you're going to have road blockages because of rain. You're going to have, I mean, granted, they happen very quickly, where a winter storm is kind of a buildup. That's really my Super Bowl, I call it. Yeah. My time of the year to shine is in those 2 months, and we just upgraded to this unbelievable weather system with this mega Doppler and stuff. So, fun.
Jim, when do you start talking to Rob on well, we'll talk about a winter season at least.
Winter? October.
Yeah.
We start definitely. You know,
well, that's one
Rob
of the, that was one of the snows we got this year. Was
just before Halloween.
Fluke of a fluke. Yeah, that one.
That was one of the, I think that took up, what, an inch of it or an inch and a half? Or?
I show you the pictures, and it was funny because Andalusia, the lower end of the township,
we didn't get it.
We didn't have anything.
And on
in Trevose, we had 3, 4 inches of snow on the
That was unbelievable.
A very strange storm.
I had some
really
people calling me saying, you know, it's snowing like crazy. I said, I thought there was something wrong with it.
Yeah, it was right around Halloween, and
and actually you had to go up there.
Yeah, I had
3
3 salt trucks.
As a meteorologist, you do a second guess. You look at it and you go, this just can't be. This just doesn't happen. And you know, up in Allentown, I mean, they had 7, 8 inches of snow, and it stuck to everything. It was like a real snowstorm, but all the trees had leaves on them, and it took all the power lines down. But you looked at it, and you saw what happened in New England. Western Massachusetts had almost 20 inches. And my buddy worked up there in Springfield, and he said, we didn't have any power for 4 or 5 days in Connecticut. And you look at it, and you keep looking at it and going, is this really going to happen? Because you're going, statistically, it should not, and the numbers don't match up even temperature-wise, but it does. And you look back in time, and one of the downsides to weather and climatology, which I studied, is we don't know what happened in 1326. We don't know what happened in 1512. There's no records. Maybe there was a storm like this in Bensalem before it was called Bensalem. It was nothing but woods and stuff. Yeah. So I think in the
I was surprised that you said they kept records from 1870.
Yeah, well, they're not as reliable. When you look at some of these stories, you really had to get into probably around the time that aviation took off. Because the Weather Service's sole purpose was for aviation. It was not for the public. It was that's why everything's at the airport. You always hear all the airport, because it's really made for the planes, those observations, the wind, the temperature, and that's why when the Weather Service started, that's when it really started getting better. It was actually an organization to keep all this. 1870, you had maybe a farmer that kept those records. The rain gauge or the snow at his farm in Langhorne or something like that.
Yeah, so, you're right about that, but I don't know how reliable they were.
Yeah.
Farmers, we never had time to write.
You're always working.
Milking cows and planting
crops. Not that part. We were all raising vegetables. Jim, I want to try to make everybody understand out there. We're talking to Rob, who's out in Arizona.
Right.
And we're talking about you using Rob
in
for our weather forecast. So maybe we should, really, I want to make sure they understand what we're doing.
Well, what we're doing, Rob and Rob's company, they'll forecast the weather and watch the models and interpret what the models are saying for our particular area. Even though Rob's in Arizona, we're just a phone call away or a text message or an email or through his website. And he can keep in constant contact with me during a storm. And his forecasting over the last couple of years, and even going back when he was with Fox, where I first started watching his weather forecasting, and then I said, how does this guy write all the time? I mean, there must be something, And you watch the other local stations and listen to the radio, and you hear forecasts that are all over the place.
Oh, we might get a few letters on this one.
Well, we may. But
the mayor made the same comment of Philadelphia, Nutter of last year.
But it was nice that you can rely on one person, and instead of being all over the place, and focus my attention on his forecast, and that's my starting point.
Well, maybe for understanding, for the purposes of it, you have a company that people can rely on, that you will do their area.
Customize
it for their area. Am I correct?
Yeah, and I think the biggest difference, Mayor, is I was in television. I know how it works. You've got one forecaster to another handing this off. And you also have forecasters that are not looking at stuff all day. They have another life, and their family, whatever. And it can get changed around. It can get a little mixed up, and it's also television. I was in it, where when you have one guy that's looking constantly at stuff like I do, you follow everything. You can follow all the little things changing, and that's what makes having a forecast for a township so critical versus watching television or turning on the radio station. Everybody's going to give a different spin, and forecasters look at computer models and spin them differently. There might be a guy that likes this North American mesoscale model, which is a US based. There might be a guy that likes a European model. They all take different variables, and all these variables come in through planes sending information, weather balloons, buoys, and it's really the forecaster's job to look at all this, take all this data, 262,000 equations a second go into these weather models, 250,000 equations a second, all over the world. This is how they come up with scenarios via satellite and radar and all this. And this is why being away from somewhere, because technology's gotten so much better, you were a farmer. You had to look up at the sky, and someone look at that and go, we look at the satellite, that's our sky. So I can be somewhere else. But going back to the models, it really, to me, is being able to look at the same place over and over, day and night, that makes the forecasting more accurate than the television. I'm not mocking anybody on TV, because I'm a lot of friends with the local TV people. It's just the way it's handed off sometimes. And some people will play a little more conservative approach than others. When I forecast with Jim, I give it straight up. I don't need to be teasing it on television. I don't need to be waiting and worrying that I might be wrong. I give it to him and say, this is what I see for Bensalem, this is what I'm going with, and here's how it's trending. And that's the rapport we have. And I think that's the big difference when you use a customized forecast. Well, the site's called liveweatherblogs.com, but the company's called Storm Surge, which is sort of the waves in a hurricane, LLC. And basically the company, we do other things too. But our big thing right now is to talk to Montgomery and Bucks County and say, we really got this local stuff for you. And when we have a microburst coming, more than likely the radio and TV station is not going to be on that. They're not even going to cut in if they're in programming. I'm in the business, I know it. He can call me up at the whim, text, call, right there. So you're getting what we call a weather butler. You want to call it like that?
I like that.
You like that?
Yeah,
I mean, you're really a weather butler for the township. You've hired your own personal meteorologist to watch over the sky all the time and give you a heads up. Whereas most TV guys are watching 15 counties, and they're only in for one shift. They go home, they have dinner, they have their family. They don't worry about it. I don't worry about Bensalem. I don't need to worry about them. I'm working my one TV shift. Like I said, I'm in it, and there's nothing wrong with it. It's just the nature of the business.
One of the things surprising me, and in this last month or so, the way they're tracking these tornadoes.
Yep.
And they've done a much better job on a warning system, being able to pick up when these things are going to hit.
One of the new things, and Bensalem would fit in this, is called a tornado emergency. This is something new where tornado emergency is when there is a higher than normal risk that there could be a tornado here, it's for a very populated area, the tornado emergency. If you were in Wichita, in a county where there's 20 farms and there's really no town, you wouldn't get that. Emergency is really set for high populated areas. You saw what happened to Dallas. That whole truck freight place went up. I mean, you see what the potential is. And we may get one this year for Bensalem, and people may not know what it means. A tornado emergency is there's a higher than normal risk of tornadoes for this area in a highly populated area. Bensalem obviously fits in that, in the Philadelphia area. This is one of the most populated places in the country, the Middle East, or the mid-Atlantic here. So that's a new term. They're trying a lot harder to get to people sooner. And that is interesting because I do think the tornadoes are migrating a little further east. The way the whole pattern is starting to change. We may be in a cycle for 20 years, but you notice there have been more tornadoes and bigger tornadoes than there used to be.
So tell me, how's it look for this year? Everybody keeps telling me all the money we saved on our budget last year.
We
but we blew it on in the storms that we had. Most of the storms. Hopefully get a little bit back from FEMA. We're trying.
Yeah, I think we're going to do okay.
I hope so.
With that, keeping our fingers crossed. Hopefully, we'll hear something within the next 60 days.
Yeah,
all our paperwork's in.
You know, we're surrounded by water. We're a peninsula.
Yeah.
We got a creek on both sides and a river on our east.
Mm-hmm.
So we deal with a lot of water problems.
Which is probably going to be the biggest issue outside of a winter event, dealing with FEMA, like you said. I mean, the East Coast has been spared a lot from any hurricanes. And one thing people are learning, you go back to Floyd in '99, you know, the disaster that was in Irene, is you do not need a Category 3 or 4 hurricane here. Right. You need a 1 because everything, as it hits Pennsylvania, starts getting this thing called an orographic lift. Even though you only have a little bit of hills here, the moisture will get squeezed out of a tropical system and drop. If you notice, between Floyd and Irene, the heaviest rains have been inland, not at the beaches, because of that local phenomena. And that'll happen again. It'll happen again here.
What always scares me is the shore part down there. That's not our problem. I have a home down there, but other than that, I mean, the ocean always, what route that takes.
Well, the shore is a different situation. They're going to you're going to deal with the Jersey Shore. You have a barrier island. You're going to deal with storm surge, flooding from the ocean, and winds. Where here, the winds, because of the friction of crossing all this land, we deal with inland flooding. It's called freshwater flooding. And the Weather Service and the Hurricane Center always like to tell you some of the highest fatalities, unfortunately, and damage comes from inland flooding. You look at Irene, which was just retired last week, by the way. No more Hurricane Irene. They retired the name.
Yeah, I saw that.
There was enough damage and enough 40 fatalities in the U.S. There was 8 in the Caribbean. That they look at that and they say that's enough to retire it. You know, because it's a bad memories for people. People lost their house, they got flooded, they lost money, they may have lost a loved one. So Irene's and Floyd's tell us that you may even just get a tropical storm. You know, everybody gets fixated, fixated on this hurricane down in Florida that's going to come up the coast, and they see the Cat 1 or the Cat 2. That doesn't matter. It's the moisture that goes with it. And both those storms had a stalled cold front that sat right over that Mid-Atlantic fault line. There's a little fault line, which is the fall line, so to speak, where the hills start from here, like from the coastal plain of Jersey. But Bensalem's pretty close to it.
Yeah. We learned a lot today.
Yes.
Well, this is what we look at, very localized.
Well, I learn a lot every time I talk to them, Eric.
Well, you have next to the last word. So
next to the last word. Keep up the good work, Rob.
Yeah.
I mean, it's working. It's working really well, and I'm glad we're able to keep doing this.
And it's the first time I met Rob, by the way, and heard your name many times. So it's the first time I met you. You definitely have the last word.
Well, I think for me and the company, the excitement also is it's a hobby, you know, and you have any hobbies you have, you just constantly are looking at that. And when your job can be your hobby, you heard that, it's the greatest job in the world. You're just basically having fun, but also to be able to have ties back here still and know that this has really been my best area to forecast. I grew up here. This is my turf. And to be able to help Jim out, it's great. You know, we help each other out. He's, you know, obviously contracted with us. And to me, that's the fun. The company's great. We're growing. I think we offer a great product. So,
Rob,
good. Thanks, man.
Pleasure to meet you and have you here today. Every time I hear your name, I can put it to a face now. Until next time, everybody, God bless.
This is your kingdom.